When my son asked me if he could be involved in professional sport, I said yes, of course you can. And he said how? He said there's no one in sport who has any of the challenges that I do. My aim was to find these athletes, coaches, professionals, and interview them and share their stories so that they can show the world what is beyond perception. Hello and welcome to a special edition of Beyond Perception podcast, a podcast that would normally look at the neurodiverse and physical disability of our athletes and coaches involved in sports. However, today we've got a different episode for you. With the London Marathon just round the corner and me participating to raise the money for the Neuromuscular Centre, a place close to my heart, what looks after not only my wife but my sister-in-law with a condition known as muscular dystrophy, limb girdles, we have got on a special guest who has the same condition, and we want to talk to her and explore what it is that she does in her everyday life and how she gets through the world and shows that people that's what's beyond perception. Today I'm joined by co-host Emma Biggin. Emma, thank you for joining us again. How are we?
Yeah, I'm all good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to a special episode today.
Not a problem. Have you been up to anything? Any visits?
I don't think I've been anywhere exciting this week. Busy with work though, which is very cool. And I'm back in Wales in a few weeks, so looking forward to it.
Really good link as well. Great link to the person we've got coming on today. So today's special guest is a young lady called Cerys Davage, who is a podcaster herself. She has openly started to talk about her disability and basically bringing people into her life so they can understand a little bit more about what goes on with her and her disability, but also being able to share the stories of others around and promote positive stories around the disability. So it should be a really, really good conversation, and I think our listeners and our viewers will really take a lot from the conversation. And before we begin, please make sure you like and subscribe and leave your comments down below. We need all the help that we can get from our viewers and our followers, so please keep allowing us to grow and spread our podcast out across all the platforms to as many people as possible. Thank you very much in advance for that. Now sit yourself down, get yourself ready, and we're about to introduce to you Cerys Davage. Hello and welcome back, everybody. As you can see, we are joined by a very special guest, Cerys Davage. Cerys, really grateful for you coming on the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honoured to be asked to come on.
No, it's brilliant that you've come on. And we've had a little bit of a chat offline. And again, we want to reiterate, this is not our normal Beyond Perception podcast. But we've really wanted to get you on because the things that I've been able to see you do and the way in which you are presenting Beyond Perception, I think is a perfect representation of what this show's about. And selfishly for me, it also is a really selfish way to plug my marathon run so I can try and get people to sponsor me a little bit more, as it's linked to some of the things we're going to talk about. But no, we're really, really grateful for getting you on. And I suppose we want to start straight away with, who is Cerys Davage for our listeners? Who are you?
I'm Keris. I'm 24 years old and I live in Cardiff in Wales, born and bred here. And I have a podcast called Unbalanced where I talk about life with limb girdle muscular dystrophy 2I/R9, as it is recently known as. But yeah, I just like to share a bit of my life online, trying to challenge perspectives around disabilities in young people, and that's what I'm really passionate about. I'm passionate about educating people who might not know much about disabilities in young people, especially rare diseases like LGMD, and also connecting with the community as well. So obviously that's how Greg and I met.
Yeah, no, it's been brilliant, and it's really interesting following you, and obviously the listeners and viewers can find you on your social media accounts, and we'll put all the links in for everybody at the end. But yeah, it's been really interesting following you as you've started to really, I would say, embrace your disability. But what was life like prior to your diagnosis?
Well, my diagnosis journey is a bit of a unique one. So usually with this condition, it's not maybe obvious right from the beginning. So my condition is a later onset, so it starts to affect around teenage years, early 20s is kind of the norm. And it is a progressive condition, so it basically means my muscles weaken over time. But I was actually diagnosed pre-symptomatic, so I wasn't struggling with anything when I had the diagnosis, but it was kind of accidentally diagnosed through blood work I was having anyway for celiac disease, and they found the CK levels in my blood, the creatine kinase levels, were really, really high, which is enzymes in the muscles. So the doctors obviously went down that route. They thought I was having liver failure, and I had a couple of biopsies, and then eventually through genetic testing as well, I got the diagnosis. But it was more my parents that got the impact of that, and they decided not to tell me about the diagnosis at that time. I was only about 8 years old, because I wasn't struggling, and there wasn't any point if I was still having quite a normal childhood. So even when I was starting to struggle, it was around 12 years old. I was always the slowest in my class on sports day. I'm not like Greg. I'm not an athlete. I'm not a runner at all. But yeah, I just started to struggle throughout my teens with things like climbing the stairs or getting up from the floor. I would fall a lot. I'd have quite frequent times where my legs would just give way at any moment in time. And I would just be down like that before I even knew it. And that's still a symptom I really struggle with. And I guess during that time, throughout high school in my teenage years, even though I knew I had the condition, I never considered myself disabled because I was never set apart from my friends. Yes, I struggled with stairs, but it wasn't to the extent of that it was an obstacle that literally separated me from other people. You know, I wouldn't have to look up venues beforehand. I could still be quite spontaneous. I could still had quite a good amount of energy to last me throughout the day. So I guess even though I was diagnosed before I started to have symptoms, there is a kind of before and after of classing myself as disabled, because it is a progressive condition. It does get worse, and I have experienced that weakening over time, over the years. You know, I had to navigate going to university and being independent for the first time, but also starting to get used to using mobility aids, and that is kind of what starts to set you apart from the non-disabled people, right? So I guess it is funny you say, Greg, you know, I seem quite, you know, at peace with it, or that I've like accepted it. But it's definitely a journey. I think over these years I've had to be more open about it. I've had to self-advocate a lot because the condition is not very visible. You know, if you looked at me right now, sat down, you wouldn't think that I have a disability. So navigating that has been an interesting one as well, and something I've had to get used to. So I think my relationship with being disabled is still quite an ongoing one, but it's definitely something I'm more open about now since obviously starting my podcast.
Yeah, no, and amazing that you share that with us straight on from the off. I think that really is something that resonates with all of the people we've had on our show previously, and our listeners probably will resonate with that really well. Just going back to them when you were younger, was your childhood very normal, like active, like you were saying, like sports day races, but like was you as, what do you mean, would you say your childhood was exactly what everybody would imagine it would be, or was there anything that was subtly different at the time?
I would say, you know, looking back, especially considering a lot of things that I used to be able to do that I can't now, I'd say my childhood was pretty normal. I was a very busy child, just like I'm a very busy adult, but in a very different way. So as a child, I used to play the piano and the harp. So that required a lot of practicing, a lot of rehearsing, did all my grades. I also frequently went swimming, had swimming lessons. I had tap dancing lessons at some stages in my life with my sisters. So I I was kind of being like thrown into everything, which is, I think, is great to do as a child anyway, to figure out what you like. But I think my parents probably just got really overwhelmed having to take me to classes like every single evening and weekend. So eventually I gave up tap dancing, which obviously I would not be able to do now anyway, so it's probably a good call. But I would say, even though I wasn't the sportiest in school, I was still very active. I still tried everything, you know, even when I started high school, I was a part of the tennis club for a bit at lunchtimes. I joined the hockey team for about a term before I realised that this is not for me. So I'd still throw myself into everything. And even through school, I would go to the gym a lot and just do my own things. So yeah, looking back, I think I still had quite a normal childhood. But after I had the diagnosis, I think my parents knew what was coming up before I even had like come to terms with it, really, before I even knew the reality of knowing that I'd lose things over time. So I think my parents were really good at just throwing us into things that, you know, just to try them, knowing that I may not be able to do this in the future. So I climbed Yr Wyddfa, which is formerly known as Snowdon, the highest mountain in Wales. And I did that when I was about 10 years old, and I struggled then, and I know for a fact I couldn't even step foot on it now. I'd probably have to take the train up now. And my family also, we all went on a skiing trip, which I wouldn't be able to ski the normal way now. I know there are different adaptations, which I might explore in the future, but I think my parents are really good at giving us the most normal childhood possible. And I say us because I have two younger sisters who also have the same condition.
And that's because, just on that, that's because it's genetic, is that right? It's a genetic.
Yes. Yeah. So both my parents are carriers of the gene, so they're not affected, but they both just carry the gene. And obviously there was a 1 in 4 chance of me getting both of those bad genes, and I did, and so did my sisters, so it's quite rare.
Yeah, and the rarity is, in this moment right now, is actually not rare, because Michelle and her sister are exactly the same, and it's probably not, exactly the same. So Michelle grew up of the two. So my wife Michelle and her sister Leanne have both got the condition, and again it was passed down from the parents. Now Leanne is the older of the two, and she was more. Well, they recognised it in her earlier. She was a tiptoe walker, so they knew that something was not right then. But what was interesting at the time, and Michelle always explains this, is that they thought it was a genetic mutation. So actually, Michelle didn't get diagnosed until 2011, 2012, after we've had Noah. So after we had our firstborn, and she recognised some things weren't right. And it was, it's funny because I wanted to ask about your childhood, because like me and Michelle have gone out since we were like 17, 18, so we've been together for so long. The activities that you would do, and like the one that always sticks out is we'd go and do like Go Apes, and we'd have a great time, and we knew nothing. But what we always knew was, for the day after, Michelle was shattered, and we used to, you know, have a bit of a laugh and a bit of a joke, and think it was because we've made her exercise and all of that. And ultimately, what we never knew was, by doing that activity was actually really draining her the day after, because she had this unknown muscle wasting condition. And so it was just really interesting. So like, when you were saying about how it's within your family as well, it just resonates so much with us in our house. But it's really amazing to hear your parents, how supportive they've been, and how strong they appear. And again, the whole podcast is that beyond perception. So we said before, you've really come to terms with everything, and we know just by the first part of our conversation, there might be a little bit now and again that you still have them battles with. Your parents, when you talk about it, sound so supportive, so caring, and yet they might also have days, and have had days, where they're thinking, this is tough.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How did they approach that conversation? Because you said initially, when you got the diagnosis at 8, they obviously didn't tell you at that time. So how did they breach that as you're getting older? Because I feel that kind of adolescence age can be hard as it is. There's a lot of change going on. There's a lot of social normally issues, but situations going on. So how did they kind of approach that conversation?
That's a good question. I'm actually glad they didn't tell me before I started getting symptoms. Firstly, just because I was a bit of a hypochondriac, so I'm sure I would have like looked out for symptoms and faked them to try and get out of school or something, but also just to have a normal childhood. But I think it was around, I was around 12 years old. I just started high school. I was in year 7, and I had to return a medical form for a school trip, and I saw the words limb-girdle muscular dystrophy on it, and so obviously I came up to my mum and I was like, what is this? And she was like, okay, well, I guess it's time. So it wasn't really their decision to tell me then. I don't know what they would have done otherwise, but obviously due to this mistake on the school's behalf for not enclosing the letter, my mum ended up telling me a bit about it. And it wasn't a massive surprise because since my diagnosis, I'd been going to Great Ormond Street in London every year to have like an annual checkup. So I knew that there was something going on with my muscles. It's not like they hid the condition away from me entirely, but they didn't want to tell me the name of it because they didn't want me to Google it or Google symptoms or whatever. So I always knew that there was something going on with my muscles. It's not like I was stupid, but I didn't know anything more than what I was feeling, and I think that was quite nice because then I was able to be eased into the fact that it's going to be progressive. You might end up in a wheelchair when you're older, maybe like a little bit before a lot of older people need a wheelchair. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened. And my parents obviously had the difficult decision of obviously both my sisters were in the world by then, and they wanted to give them equal treatment as well. So they both got tested, and they obviously both came back with the same condition. And so it was something that we kind of navigated together as a family. But I really do feel for my parents because it was probably a bit of a shock to them. And I really do feel for people my age, who can actually... who are old enough to understand these things, to get symptoms. I don't know when Michelle and her sister were diagnosed, but, at this age, you just don't want anything like that. And I'm sure that would have been a massive shock.
Yeah, and it would have been. And again, it's really interesting when you're talking around, like, you understand with the condition that things are going to change for you. And I suppose... There's no real time constraint though with it, is there? It's all dependent on the individual. So how do you manage that as somebody who is like trying to navigate their life, but knowing that some things are going to be more difficult, but you're not sure when?
It is difficult because it's such a rare condition. There's not enough research for like a clear timeline, and I think it is so varied from person to person. So it's hard for me to know, to not know the future, to not know at what age I'll maybe stop being able to walk, for example, if that will even happen. It really trips me out when I think too much about what I might be like in the future. So I try not to think about that too much. I try to just focus on the here and now, on the present, focus on what I can still do. Obviously grieving things that you used to be able to do that you can't anymore. I think it's important to have those moments. Like, I can't run anymore. I used to go out for runs and stuff, but I can't now. So grieving that, but also not tripping out too much about thinking of the future, because you just don't know, and because, like I said, it's a rare condition. So I try to focus on how I am rather than compare myself to other people with the condition. Like I said, my 2 younger sisters have the condition. They're so different from me, and I was a lot worse at their age than they are at this current age. So I don't want them to compare themselves to me either, because we are all very, very different, even though it's such a niche condition. So I just try to focus on the present.
No, superb. That's really, really cool. And that would then lead me to just bring into so you're doing your podcast and you're sharing to the world what life is like with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. How how we found that, and what was the driver behind it?
I found it quite scary at first because I think the only people that really knew about my disability were like my close family and friends. But that's really it. Like, I didn't really talk about it much in school. And I guess the podcast was kind of like a coming out in a way of my disability. And that's when I just told everyone online, all my colleagues, my friends, everyone I used to go to school, university with, like literally everyone in my life that was following me online, hey, I have a disability and I'm going to start talking about it now. So that was quite a shift in how comfortable I was talking about it, because I just wasn't really beforehand. But I just saw that there was a gap in the market, especially around COVID. Obviously, lockdown, podcasts started to be quite popular and I really got into them. But I noticed that there weren't any podcasts that I could relate to on that level. There were a lot about being in your 20s, being a young woman and things like that. But I just wanted that extra little bit of just someone that was my age with a disability, because I didn't have that growing up. I didn't have anyone to relate to in that way. So I did notice that gap in the market, and I always knew I wanted to start a podcast because I am a presenter at heart. Like that's my goal, that's my dream job, and I love yapping. My parents say I can talk for Wales. And I just love interviewing people, and because I'd had some radio experience and things, I thought I may as well just give it a go and see what it's like. And like I said, it was a bit scary at first, but I just fell in love with the producing side and, you know, figuring it all out as I went along, and yeah, and just meeting so many amazing people with different disabilities as well, and just raising awareness.
I guess from that, I think it's amazing. I think it's fantastic when people raise their voice and share about their own experiences, because I think it just opens conversations for others. And so I guess my question is, what kind of feedback have you got from it? Have you had people saying like, thank you for sharing this, because actually I can relate to some of it, or I don't feel, I'm kind of thinking your sisters, like you've been, I know it's very different and your experience of it is different, but you've kind of been in that situation of navigating having a condition that's going to be with you forever. And is there that kind of support and that feedback that you've got from raising the voice about it a little bit?
The feedback has been absolutely incredible, kind of mind-blowing, because like I said, my sisters were the only ones that I knew with the condition growing up, but they weren't really affected, so I couldn't relate to them really. But since starting my podcast, I got to amplify my voice and my podcast through different charities and organisations that wanted to share a bit about my podcast. And through that, I was connected to a lot of people with different types of muscular dystrophy, but also my specific condition. So I was just so pleased to meet other people within the community, especially since it's such a rare condition. With my specific subtype, there are only 100 people in the UK registered with the condition. So being able to finally connect with those people within the community has just been incredible. And them saying that listening to my podcast is like listening to themselves, and just hearing their own experiences being like fed back to them. It not only helps them, but it really helps me knowing that people can relate to what I'm saying. My goal was to raise awareness, but I've also found a community within that as well. I've also found people that we can relate to each other. And that's been the most rewarding thing ever. And the podcast has since grown because of that, because of word of mouth and more people with the same conditions as me finding it. And yeah, it's just been absolutely incredible.
I think there's some really interesting studies about social groups and communities, and one of them is it's not necessarily the number of social groups that you're a part of, it's the quality of those social groups. And in that way, that the positive community that you're creating through the podcast, through kind of, I'm assuming, conversations outside of that as well, and people being able to follow you and kind of see you navigate life, that's going to be so beneficial, I imagine, for them, but also for yourself in having that community around you. So I think that's really cool. And have you felt it's benefited you to kind of hear other people's experiences and voices as much as you sharing theirs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I hope that my podcast is like talking to a friend on FaceTime or catching up with someone over a coffee, like really informal. And people have felt more comfortable since listening to my podcast because they feel like they can get to know me through the podcast. People are feeling more comfortable sharing their stories with me, which is just such an honour to, to be someone that they can trust to share such vulnerable things. But hearing all these stories has just really been eye-opening for me, and just so comforting knowing that we're not alone. And it is all about community, isn't it? Even if you just know one other person that's going through the same thing as you, that can say, I know exactly what you're going through, that's not weird, it's not abnormal, like I totally get it. It just makes your life so much easier. It's like you're sharing the burden with someone else in a way. And yeah, there's nothing like that. I think that, it's just been incredible. And I've had some amazing opportunities since starting it. Like I've been able to travel to different conferences, to meet people and to share my stories in big spaces. And yeah, it's just kind of lit a fire in me, and it's definitely what I want to do full time.
Really, really good. I just think the way you talk and the way you share your story is really, really powerful. And like you say, being able to listen to other people and have that conversation, and I suppose, like you say, the rarity starts off as potentially it's just you, and then this community forms around you, and it still is rare, but there's now like 100 people around you who understand it and have some similarities, and will have that conversation, and then there's another 100 people. Like, it just suddenly makes you become part of something really special, doesn't it? And makes you realise that you're not always on your own, you're always with people, even if you don't necessarily know them directly.
Exactly, and all over the world as well. I've been connected to so many people from like countries all over the world. My podcast reaches like over 60 countries, which is crazy. And I have now been able to make group chats or, connect with people on maybe a bit more personal level. And so that connection really is like worldwide. It doesn't matter whereabouts you're based. I do love the power of social media through that, because I wouldn't have been able to meet such incredible people otherwise.
Superb. Now, when we talk about on our podcast, we're always talking about the things like the adjustments you may have to make, or the subtleties around things that happen, so that you can get as much access to everything as you need. Would you be willing to share maybe some of the things that you maybe have to consider, which might not necessarily be what people would automatically look at you and assume you would need?
Interesting. Well, obviously a big one is mobility aids. So I thought it was either you struggle to walk or you need a wheelchair, no in between. But I recently came across walking sticks, and I'm still like navigating using one. It's still quite a new concept for me, but I'm really enjoying having a walking stick, just because it's almost like grabbing someone's arm for a walk, but if you're by yourself, it's just there for a little bit of extra stability. Nowadays I really struggle with winds. If it's a bit windy, if the ground's a bit slippery, or even slight gradients in the road as I'm walking, that's like a massive strain on my hips, and I really struggle with that. So using this walking stick helps me just navigate these little things, and just gives me an extra bit of stability. But also it's like a visual thing for other people as well, and I get really anxious if I'm walking out by myself with no mobility aids, because I look quite normal. I do have a bit of a waddle when I walk, so I have comments either way. I have some comments saying, have you broken your leg or twisted your ankle? And I'm like, no, I'm fine, I just have a disability. But then I also have people question whether I am disabled, question me using the like a blue badge space or using the accessible toilets. So I do struggle with it both ways. But having this walking stick just shows to other people like, oh, please be just a bit careful around me. And people's attitude, like I've noticed a massive shift since using one. People will walk around me to avoid bumping into me on the street. People will open doors for me. It's like I'm getting like princess treatment basically, and so that's a really big thing.
Yeah, and again, from personal experience, we see that at home as well, in terms of like how Michelle's been to, like, we'll park up and we've got a blue badge, and we'll park up to go into the garden centre, the supermarket, and there are a particular generation of people, we'll say, who seem to have an issue with us parking where we park, because they see me get out and perfectly fine. I understand that, and then they see Michelle get out, and again, you don't necessarily see it straight away, and then we'll either get the wheelchair out the back for Michelle, or I'll link her and we'll slowly make our way to get a trolley, and that'll then become her aid for walking round, and it's that perception at first of, well, why are you in these positions, and then I suppose if you look carefully, you might start to recognise some things which are probably not as common in everybody else's movement patterns. So I always have to say this on all these podcasts, because I smile so much during them, because so many stories resonate with me, and it's just, in the nicest way, it's really nice to hear that life is actually really normal for yourself and for Michelle and for Leanne. It's just not necessarily the same as what it would be for just me on my own or Emma on my own.
Exactly.
And it's really good, and it's really good to hear how you get yourself around, or not around, but you adapt to these situations. Now, there is a question I want to ask you, which I am curious about, though, is you've been away on some conferences and you've been abroad. And the big question, especially within disability of recently, is how do you find public transport, such as airports and aeroplanes and trains? And
That's a big question. The only way I could navigate public transport is asking for help. If I've not got my partner with me, who is like basically like my safety guy, like he will pick me up if I fall, he'll lift me onto trains if the step is too big. I can't navigate those by myself, and I recently went to Lisbon by myself, and obviously flew there and had to navigate that all by myself, and I didn't take a wheelchair with me, I just had my stick, but that was only possible through asking for help. And asking for help is self-care in a way, because I used to be so stubborn. I used to say, I don't need anyone's help, I want to do this by myself. But I think there comes a time where you realise actually you're just making things harder for yourself by not asking for help. So anywhere you go, I would always ask for help. If someone offers to carry your suitcase onto the train from the platform, just let them, they're just being nice. If you do fall and someone's asking how can I help you, rather than turn them away, use this as an opportunity to educate them a bit and just say, look, don't just give me your hand, because that's going to do nothing. I'm dead weight. I fell in the gym the other day. Someone had to lift me from the cross trainer, and I had to say, I'm dead weight. You're going to basically have to hug me from under my armpits and lift me up. And even though that can be quite embarrassing, it makes them feel better for helping you, and that's how I like to view it now. I like to, you always feel good if you help someone, like if you help an old lady cross the street or whatever. I don't mind being that person for other people to feel better about themselves as well. But yeah, I came across passenger assistance app for trains, and that's been a massive godsend. I can pre-plan my journey separately from actually booking the ticket. I can select exactly what assistance I need, and there'll be someone there to meet me and to help me onto the train. In airports, I always ask for a wheelchair to navigate the airports, because the airports can be a lot of walking, and also that's their job, they're literally there to help you. So I try and make use of that as much as I can now.
How have you found people's responses? If you have fallen in the gym, do you find that more people than expected come over, or was it as many as you expect? Because I feel like some people might fear, if this happens, maybe I'll just get ignored. Maybe no one will do anything. So how have you found people's reactions in the gym or trains or With
falls, if it's on the street, then bys will just come up and help me. But that time I fell in the gym recently, I didn't actually get anyone come up to me for like a while, just because I think people just assumed I would be able to get up and carry on. Because I'm a young person, I was on the cross trainer, my leg gave way and I literally fell on the cross trainer, like not even off it, like it was so awkward. And I couldn't get myself untangled and up. And I basically just had to sit there until someone came up to me. So that was a bit humbling, because I thought like people would come running, and there seemed to be no staff just at that specific moment. But one lovely man came over and helped me. And then afterwards, like, people realised that, oh, like, she did need a bit of help, and people asked from their treadmills, like, are you okay? And I'd be like, yeah, I'm fine. But I think people do tend to assume that because I'm young, like, oh, I must have just tripped or, you know, had a blip, but I can just get back up. So sometimes it is a case of being like, can I please have some help? Because sometimes people won't come up, but usually there'll always be someone around to help, because that's just, you know, the kindness in human beings.
And then I suppose my last question for you right now would be, you talk about wanting to be in the present, but where do you want to take yourself to in the next 10 years? Because the podcast is going really well, and you're really selling some really strong messages, and your positive vibes just radiate through the podcast. Like, so where do you want to be though in 10 years? How does life want to be for you, or what would you like it to look like?
Thank you, that's very kind of you. Well, I'll be married, which is very exciting. I'm getting married next year, so that's one thing that I'm excited about. But in all seriousness, I think I am so passionate about the podcast, about meeting people, and since being able to go to these conferences, I want to just be able to make the most of that whilst I still can. I want to be able to travel to different places across the world to interview people, to meet people, to share my story, to share other people's stories. And I really feel that is my calling, and hopefully with a bit more help and a bit more sponsorship, then I'll be able to make that a full-time reality. But right now I'm just trying to build as much of that as possible right now. Yeah, I would just love to just keep going and keep connecting with more of the community, but also raise awareness of different disabilities. You know, I don't just talk about my own disability. I interview people with all different types of life barriers, I call them, and how they still live their best lives. So I just want to keep going and keep meeting all these amazing people, and yeah, be able to just travel a bit before I settle down and maybe start a family or something.
Lovely. That's really good.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I think from someone, because I guess out of the three of us, I probably know the least. I haven't got personal experience, and I think it's just been fascinating hearing you talk about it. So first of all, massive thank you.
Thank you.
And also just what you're doing with the podcast, I think is phenomenal. I wish more people took that step, and it's such a brave step to make, and to actually voice experiences and what's going on, and just make it comfortable for other people, so you can create that community. And I think one thing, I guess my final question, and I think it probably will go back to that living in the moment idea, is I've worked with a lot of athletes around injury, and that can be a really hard time for people, but the thing that kind of keeps them going is that end point of, okay, it's an injury, but you know, there's progression, we can set goals that we're reaching towards and kind of hopefully come out the other side. With conditions whereby we know it's going to be forever, what advice would you give to others that in managing that kind of realization of the longevity of it?
Yeah, it's a really tough thing, and I would say that there's always a way to adapt. Like Greg was saying, you know, there are so many ways to adapt to just normal things that maybe you're used to, but you might have to change along the way. Little things like, you know, when I tie my hair up, I now need to lean my elbows on a table to take the pressure off my arms. You know, if I drop something, I use a grabber to pick it up now. Just little things like that. There's always ways to adapt. And connect with the community. That's the most important thing, I'd say. There's always going to be someone who is just like you, but maybe a few steps ahead of you that can give you advice. And I think that just makes life so much easier, and you just feel so much better knowing that there's someone going through the same thing as you. So definitely that as well.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Super. Now, before we let you go, we have a set of quick fire questions,
Ooh.
and I am gonna subtly change it just because I'm not sure what some of the answers would be traditionally. But the first question would be: what's your super strength?
My super strength, my voice.
What's your biggest weakness?
Or probably also my voice.
Do you want to explain that one? Or?
Probably just, yeah, I tend to talk a lot, and a lot of it is without thinking sometimes, so I guess that can be my weakness.
Okay. What is your most memorable moment?
Oh gosh, in life. I would say in this context, probably the first time I used a wheelchair, and it was in Disney World in Florida. I don't know if you guys have been, but you need to, like, if you go, you walk like miles and miles and miles a day, and I really, really struggled. I was 16 years old, and I was like, I can't do it anymore. And the rest of my family were like, no, like we're in Epcot, we need to like walk the whole way around, we need to see everything. So I had to use a wheelchair, like rented from Disney, and it was a bit of a vulnerable moment to begin with, but I don't know why that is the first thing that came to my head. But it was in Disney. That's pretty cool.
What is your biggest learning moment about yourself?
Wow. I know it's supposed to be rapid fire, but I need a second.
All good.
Biggest thing I've learnt about myself. Probably that it's okay to like be wrong. Sometimes it's okay to still be learning, and to admit that you don't know things sometimes, and to always be searching for answers, to be searching for new information. I think that's really important, and that's something I've learnt a lot about myself, I think.
Nice.
Yeah.
And last question would be: where can our viewers and listeners find you and follow you and listen to more about you?
Great question. My podcast is available on every podcast platform, so Spotify, Apple, all of that, and also YouTube, where I do vlogs as well outside of the podcast. You can find me on social media at Cerys Davage on TikTok and Instagram, and also at Unbalanced Podcast on Instagram.
Superb. Thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for joining us. It's been brilliant talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
Cheers.
Yeah,
thank you.
It's been fascinating.
Emma, it was great to have Keris on. What was your initial takes from that conversation?
I think there was so much to take from that conversation. A couple of things that I think have stood out to me: the importance of community, and that sense of understanding, that sense of belonging. I think Keris really emphasised how important that has been to her, but also to other people as well. And the other thing that really kind of I think was highlighted within Keris talking with us today is there's always adaptations. And yes, it's living in the moment, but it's how can I keep going with this? How do I adapt so actually I can continue to live the life that I want to be living? And I think that's really powerful. So I think there was so much that Keris spoke about today, and like I say, from the perspective of someone that probably knows little about the condition, I think it was really fascinating to know a little bit more, but also take away kind of those nuggets that I think, to be honest, everyone will benefit from holding on to a little bit more as well.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And again, we said it in the chat. Just the way in which she talks about it, it just exudes positivity and a real contentness. And she mentioned at times it's not always like that, but just the way her outlook, it just seemed so positive. And what I found really interesting was, like, this was our first real conversation where we weren't talking so much about sport, and yet I feel like the conversations we've had previously with our guests and around neurodiversity, that the correlation just seems to be the same. It's this idea that we have something that makes us a little bit different, but maybe it's not obvious, and we just knuckle down and we do the things that we can do to embrace the life that we're involved in, and sometimes we have struggles and sometimes we don't, and it felt very similar again for us today.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think a big thing that seems to be similar is the idea that perhaps society isn't at the moment best supporting everyone that's there. And I think one thing that really stood out is that idea of, public transport. Things like the potential judgment of people because you're in the disabled bay, or because you want to take a priority seat, or because someone doesn't look a certain way. And I think there's a lot that actually society can do, and people can start to make small adjustments and perhaps stop judging at face value and start to actually understand someone else's experience. And I think it all speaks very much to the same. I think society needs to start making some changes because everyone else is, like Keris said, she's making adaptations to live that life, but actually society needs to do the same in return.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. The adaptations that people like Keris or Michelle would need wouldn't actually be at any sort of disadvantage to the likes of myself and you. It would actually just be embraced as what would be acceptable in terms of, you know, ramp access or low level access or slightly wider door frames for those with wheelchairs, or things like that. And I bring it back to a sporting context from my own personal experiences, like junior and amateur sports environments like rugby clubs and football clubs are a great foundation for community. However, they were all designed a long time ago and actually are not very accessible. And there are not many sporting environments, unless they're the newest amateur buildings or some of the professional sporting environments. They're still not accessible. They're still not supportive and friendly for everybody. And I think that's definitely somewhere where change could happen. So hopefully we can start to see some things in the future. But again, I think having these conversations and sharing the stories and the differences that people have, I think is going to make a massive difference to helping us in achieving that.
Yeah, and it's so important to raise those voices because a lot of the time it's not a conscious choice to work in a certain way, to design things in a certain way. Sometimes it's just a lack of education or knowledge or understanding, and actually the more voices are out there, the more opportunity there is to learn and to understand other people's experiences and to then make those adaptations. So I think it's so powerful what Keris is doing and sharing her voice, and obviously that's what our podcast tries to aim to do with other athletes, trying to share their voice, share their experiences, because given the information, a lot of people would be willing to make adaptations, but the information isn't always there to start with.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And again, I think it's been a really good conversation. I think it's been really nice and refreshing to have a slightly different perspective in how we've done this podcast today. But yeah, I found it really, really beneficial. And obviously, if the listeners and viewers have really enjoyed it, please leave your comments below and let us know. And obviously, you can follow Keris on Unbalanced Podcast, and you'll find her on social media as well. But thank you very much for today, Emma. Appreciate your time, and looking forward to catching up on our next podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Take care, everyone.